Welcome to Terrifying Creepy Stories, the place where the dark corners of forgotten places come alive through bone-chilling true tales. If you're new here, I'm glad you found us. And to my loyal subscribers, thank you for always returning to the shadows with me. Before we dive into tonight's haunting story, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next terrifying upload. And tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these creepy stories travel. Now, turn the lights down, and let's begin. Story 1. I've always found peace in the woods. Not the heavily trafficked trails, but the ones that barely exist. The hidden paths you find by accident, where the trees crowd close and the sound of the world fades until it's just your footsteps and your breath. That's where I like to go when life got too loud. It was late October a few years ago. I had the day off, and the weather was that perfect mix of cool and crisp, where the leaves crunched underfoot and the air smelled like earth and decay, but not in a bad way. I parked near an old fire road I'd explored a few times before, tucked my phone into my jacket, and set off. About 30 minutes in, I strayed off the path, following a trail of deer prints down a shallow ravine. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't rot, not at first. It was sweet. Overwhelmingly sweet, like rotting fruit or spoiled wine. It didn't belong there. The deeper I walked, the stronger it got, thick and syrupy in the air, clinging to the back of my throat. Curious, and a little unsettled, I pushed aside some underbrush, expecting maybe a dead deer or a pile of trash. But what I found was something I still struggle to explain without my voice catching in my throat. It was a man. Or what used to be one. He was slumped against the base of a tree, body bloated and misshapen, his skin a sickly green-black with deep purple marbling. His jaw hung open like it had come unhinged, and one of his eyes was missing, just an empty socket where flies danced in and out. His clothes were half-torn, soaked and crusted with fluids I couldn't identify, and the smell, the sweetness was nauseating now, almost thick enough to taste. I froze. For at least a minute I couldn't move. Couldn't think. Just stared, heart pounding in my ears, breath shallow and tight. My first instinct was to run. My second was to throw up. But instead, I pulled out my phone and called 911. The dispatcher was calm, too calm. I gave my location as best I could, told them what I found, and they asked me to stay with the body until help arrived. "Don't touch anything," the woman said. "Just wait nearby, and keep your phone on." So I did. I sat maybe 10 feet away, just far enough that I didn't have to look directly at him. The sun was already starting to dip behind the trees, and with no flashlight, the forest grew darker and more unfamiliar by the minute. My phone's signal dropped to nothing. No calls, no texts. I was alone. Alone with him. That hour waiting felt like 5. At some point I started talking, just to fill the silence. I think I said things like, "I'm sorry," and "Help's on the way." I don't know why. Maybe I was talking to myself. Or maybe it was to him. When the police finally showed up. Red and blue lights flashing through the branches like a fever dream, I felt relief so strong it nearly dropped me to my knees. They thanked me, took my statement, and asked if I needed an ambulance. I told them no. I just wanted to go home. They later confirmed it was a suicide. The man had no ID on him, but they found a note tucked into the hollow of a nearby tree. No details were shared with me. Just that he chose that place, far off the trails, and had likely been there for a week or more before I found him. I tried to move on. Told myself I did the right thing. That maybe his family got some closure because I stumbled across him. But the dreams started a few nights later. And not just vague nightmares. No, I saw him exactly as I had in the forest. Slumped against that tree, skin greenish-black and swollen, one eye missing, mouth hanging open like it had forgotten how to close. I could see the flies too, still moving across his face. He never moved. He just stared at me. Always in silence. Always watching. What disturbed me most was how vivid it all was. Not the fuzzy, surreal quality dreams usually have. This was sharp. Clear. Like I was back in those woods, down to the scent of wet leaves and that sickeningly sweet rot hanging in the air. It wasn't just at night either. Sometimes I'd nod off for 10 minutes on the couch in the afternoon, and he'd be there. Same spot. Same stare. I've never been the kind of person who remembers dreams, let alone has them during quick naps. But there he was, every single time I closed my eyes. After the first week, I stopped sleeping properly. I became terrified of drifting off. I started taking over-the-counter sleep aids just to force myself into unconsciousness, hoping for a blank slate. For silence. But even drugged, he found his way in. It took nearly 5 months before the dreams finally stopped. 5 months of waking up gasping for breath. Of keeping every light in my apartment on. Of avoiding sleep like it was the real danger. People told me it was just my mind working through the trauma. That I'd seen something horrifying, and naturally, my brain needed time to process it. They say I kept seeing him because I kept thinking about him. But the unsettling part is, there were days when I didn't think about him at all, busy, full days where he never crossed my mind once. And yet, he'd still show up that night. As if he was thinking about me. Well, I'm happy I stopped seeing him in my dreams. Story 2. A few summers back, I went on a late-night bike ride with a friend. It wasn't something we did often, just one of those spontaneous decisions on a humid Friday night when neither of us could sleep. The city felt weirdly calm at that hour. Empty streets. Flickering yellow streetlights. The kind of stillness that makes you feel like you're moving through a painting rather than real life. We rode around downtown, cutting through narrow alleys and dipping past closed shops. My friend peeled off about a mile from my place, waving before turning down a side street. I remember checking the time, 12:47 a.m., before pedaling off alone. It was just 2 blocks to my apartment. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except for the construction. A big part of the road near my building had been torn up for weeks, so the only way through was along this narrow strip of sidewalk sandwiched between a chain-link fence and the road. I figured it wouldn't be an issue. The whole area was dead quiet, and I hadn't seen a car in 10 minutes. But then I saw him. He was walking ahead of me, maybe 30, 40 feet up the sidewalk. Mid-40s, scruffy in a way that didn't scream homelessness but definitely said, unstable. He wore an oversized army green jacket despite the heat and moved with a kind of stiff, twitchy urgency, like someone looking for something they'd lost. I didn't want to startle him, so about 6 feet behind I called out, "Hey, behind you!" He turned around so fast it caught me off guard. His eyes locked on mine. There was nothing confused or startled in them, just pure, seething rage. His mouth curled into this awful, twisted sneer, like I just spat on him. I swerved around him and turned left onto my street, heart thudding a little faster now. I kept pedaling, hoping that was the end of it. But then I heard it. "Fucking cunt," he shouted behind me. "I'm gonna find you and I'm gonna take you, you hear me?" I didn't look back. Just pushed harder on the pedals. I live right off the corner, and I knew better than to lead him straight to my door. My building had no buzzers or doorman, just an old stoop and a single bolt on my apartment door. I didn't want to take any chances. So I made the snap decision to keep riding. One more loop around the block, I told myself. Just until he gives up and moves on. It took me less than 2 minutes to circle back. I came up slowly, staying on the opposite side of the street, scanning the sidewalk. That's when I saw him. He was standing on my front stoop. Not walking past it. Not near it. On it. Arms crossed. Staring out toward the road like he was waiting for a bus. Or for me. I felt my stomach drop. There was no way that was coincidence. I hadn't looked back once. I'd made a random loop. He shouldn't have known where I lived. But somehow, he did. He saw me ride by again. Our eyes locked across the road. But this time, he didn't shout. He didn't move. He just stood there, perfectly still. Watching. I kept going. Didn't stop. Didn't go home. I biked straight back to my friend's place and banged on the door until she let me in, panting and trying to explain what happened between gasps. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat on her couch staring at her front window until the sun started to rise. I went home in the morning. He was gone by then. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd left something behind, something invisible and permanent, like his presence had soaked into the cracks of my building. 2 days later, my bike was stolen. It was chained up in the alley beside my apartment. I had used the lock I always used. The chain wasn't cut, it was just gone. Clean. Like it had been unlocked with a key. That's when I told my dad everything. He freaked out, obviously. But by then, it felt too late to do anything. We didn't file a police report. I didn't even know what to say. A man looked at me weird, stood on my porch, and now my bike is gone. I sounded like a paranoid lunatic. Story 3. I've never been the superstitious type. I'm not into ghosts or omens or any of that paranormal stuff. I'm a pretty logical person. I like facts, patterns, things that make sense. But what happened that night still messes with me. It was sometime last year. I remember it was during a heatwave because I had all the windows cracked open, and even at 2 a.m., the air was thick and still. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment. Nothing fancy, but it's quiet, tucked on the 3rd floor of a small building in a decent part of the city. I'd gone to bed a little later than usual, maybe around 1:30 a.m., after watching a couple of episodes of some forgettable Netflix series. I remember locking the front door, double-checking the windows, and flipping the deadbolt like I always do. My routine is automatic. I'm careful like that. I fell asleep quickly, and the dream I had wasn't anything special at first. I was in some kind of old-school coffee shop, sitting at a small table with a woman I didn't recognize. She was middle-aged, dark red hair tied back in a bun, wearing a blue raincoat even though it wasn't raining. I don't know how my brain made her up, but she felt familiar in that strange dream logic way. She was talking to me about something mundane. I can't even remember what. Something about books or the weather, I think. She was mid-sentence, and then something shifted. She stopped, turned her head slowly, and looked me dead in the eyes. Her expression changed in an instant, blank to deadly serious. No fear. No confusion. Just urgency. Like she suddenly realized something I hadn't. Then, in the calmest, clearest voice, she said, "Someone is in your apartment. Wake up." I can't explain the way that sentence hit me. It didn't feel like a dream anymore. It felt like a command. I bolted upright in bed, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my neck. My mouth was dry. My shirt was damp with sweat. I didn't move at first, just sat there, listening. The apartment was dark and quiet. The kind of quiet that hums. The refrigerator ticking. The occasional creak of old walls settling. Nothing unusual. But my whole body was on edge. Like something wasn't right, even if I couldn't see it yet. I got out of bed slowly. Tiptoed across the floor. The hardwood felt cool beneath my feet, grounding me a little. I crept toward the door, straining my ears for any sound. Still nothing. I opened the bedroom door just a crack. The hallway outside was completely dark, no light from the kitchen, no glow from the street lamps outside. I was sure I'd left the little counter light on like I always do, but now everything was pitch black. Like something had turned it off. I stepped out, heart rattling in my chest. Every instinct in me screamed to turn on the lights, but I didn't. I don't know why. I think I was scared to see something I couldn't explain. I checked the living room, kitchen, bathroom. No one. No signs of forced entry. Nothing moved. Nothing missing. The door was still locked. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. Or maybe still was, hiding somewhere I hadn't looked. I checked the closets, the cabinet under the sink, even behind the shower curtain like I was in some low-budget horror film. Still nothing. But that didn't make me feel better. I stayed up for the rest of the night. Lights on, sitting at the kitchen table, just waiting for something, anything, to happen. But the sun came up, and nothing ever did. That morning, I walked around the apartment with a strange feeling in my chest. Not fear, exactly. Not anymore. Just this deep, unsettling question that I couldn't shake. What if it wasn't just a dream? I keep going back to that woman in the dream. The way she looked at me. The way she knew. It didn't feel like imagination. It felt like a warning. Like someone, or something, was trying to tell me something I couldn't understand. I actually think she is my guardian angel, but I am a logical person to not believe in guardian angels. Story 4. I grew up in a small, quiet town in rural Georgia, one of those places where the roads disappear into woods, and you can drive for miles without seeing another soul. My parents were kind, easygoing people who trusted me more than most. On weekend nights, they'd let me sleep in the living room so I could stay up late watching TV. My older sister was a light sleeper and didn't like noise, so the living room became my own little weekend den. I was probably around 9 or 10, and back then, I loved falling asleep on the couch with the glow of late-night shows playing on low volume. It felt like freedom, staying up past bedtime with no one telling me to turn off the TV. I'd usually nod off around midnight or so, once the reruns got boring. This particular night started off like any other. I had a blanket, some dry cereal in a bowl, and an old rerun of The Nanny playing in the background. Eventually, the mix of quiet and warmth lulled me into sleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The TV was still glowing faintly, casting pale light on the walls. But something had pulled me out of sleep, a sudden, crawling sensation across the back of my neck. Like the air had changed. Like something was watching. I sat up abruptly, my heart already picking up speed. The room felt off. Still, but not peaceful. My eyes went straight to the big front window. It looked out onto our yard and a line of trees beyond, the woods that wrapped around the property like a curtain. And that's when I saw it. Perched high up in the tree nearest the house, just far enough away to blur the details, was the silhouette of a person. Not moving. Just crouched there on a thick branch, almost blending into the tree itself. But they were there. I could see the shape of them against the moonlight. They were facing me. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It didn't feel real. Who the hell climbs a tree at night in the middle of nowhere? Just to sit there, watching? Suddenly our dog, Max, a mutt who usually slept through anything, bolted to the window with his fur bristled, barking and growling like he wanted to tear through the glass. That's when I knew it wasn't my imagination. Someone was really out there. I ran, stumbling down the hallway to my parents' bedroom, trying to find words through the panic. "There's someone in the tree," I managed to say, breathless. "Right outside the window. Max saw them too." My dad didn't ask questions. He just grabbed the baseball bat he kept under the bed and slipped on his boots. Max was already at the door, barking and clawing to get outside. I stayed behind, clinging to my mom, who held me close with both arms. I don't remember how long my dad was out there. Maybe a few minutes. Maybe more. When he finally came back inside, he looked serious but calm. He said he didn't see anyone. Not in the yard, not in the tree, not in the woods beyond. "Probably just your imagination," he said softly. "Let's all get some sleep." but it didn't feel like imagination. And Max hadn't imagined it either. I didn't want to stay in the living room again, so I went to my bedroom and crawled into bed beside my sister. She was half asleep, annoyed but curious enough to listen while I whispered the whole story. Dad stayed up for a while, walking slow laps through the house with a mug of coffee in hand, peeking through the windows, checking the locks. It gave me a little comfort, watching him pace back and forth down the hallway. Eventually, things calmed. My sister drifted off. The house got quiet, and I started to relax. That's when I saw him again. My bed was up against the wall, and just a few feet beyond that was my window. The curtains were cracked open slightly. I don't even know why I turned my head to look. I wasn't expecting anything. But there he was, standing right outside my bedroom window. He was closer now, the moonlight hitting his face just enough to show the hollow, blank expression. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't yelling. He was just staring. And then he slowly raised his hand and pressed a finger to his lips. Sure. That was all. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He turned slowly, calmly, and walked straight back into the woods like he'd done it 1,000 times before. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I don't think I even blinked. I just lay there, frozen in place, staring at the window, half expecting him to come back and tap on the glass. He never did. We never saw him again. But for weeks afterward, I refused to be alone after dark. I wouldn't sleep in the living room anymore. And I never sat near that window again. My parents thought it was some wandering drifter. Maybe someone who lived in the woods and didn't mean any harm. But I was really terrified at the time the incident happened. Story 5. I was 20, barely a month into having my license, and riding the kind of high that comes with new freedom and no real sense of danger. At the time, my friends and I had developed this weird tradition, almost a mission, really, of hunting down abandoned houses to party in. Not trashing them or anything, we weren't vandals, but there was something thrilling about sneaking into places that felt like they shouldn't exist anymore. Dead homes with peeling walls and forgotten furniture, as if people had just walked out and never came back. Most of the spots we found were small, run-down ranchers or collapsing farmhouses on the edge of town. But there was one place I passed every night on my drive home from work that was different. Bigger. It sat on a lonely stretch of road off Hollow Creek, tucked behind some trees, with a long dirt driveway and a wide gravel lot in front. It looked like it had been built with money. Tall brick archways, stone pillars, vaulted roof, but the place had clearly been abandoned before it was finished. No windows. No doors. Just a skeleton of a mansion rotting under the weight of time and neglect. Something about it always caught my eye. One Friday night in late summer, just before heading to a movie, I convinced my friend Alyson to come check it out. I told him we didn't have to go inside or anything, just drive up and get a better look. Maybe it'd be the next party house we'd tell our friends about. It was just after 8 p.m., that kind of dusky hour when the sky glows purple and the air smells like grass and car exhaust. I flicked on my headlights and turned off the main road, the tires crunching over gravel as we pulled onto the property. The house loomed ahead, hulking and half-finished, its upper floors open like a broken jaw. There was an overgrown lot stretching behind it that seemed to fade into woods, but I couldn't tell where the land ended. We sat there for almost a minute, not even long enough to say much. "Creepy," I said, half smiling. "Let's bounce." I backed out slowly and returned back toward the road. That's when I noticed the headlights. A massive black pickup truck had come up behind us. I didn't hear it drive in, it was just suddenly there, and it was close. Too close. Its high beams were on full blast, filling my rearview mirror with light. I figured maybe it was someone else trying to check out the house. No big deal. But when I turned right at the light to head toward the movie theater, the truck didn't follow. Instead, it cut through the gas station on the corner, and came out in front of us, blocking the lane completely. I slammed the brakes. "What the hell is this?" Ellison said, his voice suddenly a lot more serious. Before I could answer, the driver's side door of the truck swung open and this guy stepped out. And I mean, this dude was huge. Built like a linebacker, probably in his late 40s, wearing a dark flannel shirt and jeans. His boots thudded against the pavement as he walked up to my window. His face wasn't angry exactly. It was blank. Flat. Which was somehow worse. There were no other cars around. That same busy road I'd driven 100 times? Empty. Like the whole world had just paused and left us alone with him. He tapped the window with a single knuckle. Not hard. Just enough to make me jump. I cracked it halfway, trying to sound calm. "Yeah? What were you doing back there?" he asked. His voice was low and slow. Not yelling, not threatening. Just heavy. Like every word had weight. I swallowed hard. "Just turning around," I said, lying instantly. "We got turned around and needed a spot to pull out." He stared at me for what felt like forever. No movement. No blinking. Just watching me, like he already knew I was full of shit. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile. More like something he'd practiced in a mirror. It didn't reach his eyes. "Drive safe," he said, tapping the hood of my car with the flat of his hand. Then he turned around, walked back to his truck, and pulled away without another glance. We didn't speak for almost a minute after he left. I kept driving, but my hands were shaking on the wheel. "What the hell was that?" Ellison finally muttered. "I don't know," I said. "I don't think we're supposed to be near that place." We never went back to that house. It's still there to this day, and still unfinished. Still sitting dark and empty on the edge of the woods. I've told a few people about it over the years, and they all have the same theory: drug operation. Maybe something worse. Maybe that guy was a lookout, or maybe he just lives in that shell of a house, watching for anyone who gets too curious. I don't really care to find out. Story 6. I woke up to a sharp crack, like metal clinking against tile. My eyes flicked to the clock beside my bed. 2:15 a.m. The glowing red numbers burned into the darkness. At first, I figured it was just a dream. I'd fallen asleep with one earbud still in, and the wire was half looped under my pillow. Maybe the sound came from my phone falling off the nightstand or something simple like that. But after a few seconds of silence, I heard it again. A low rustling, followed by the unmistakable thud of something heavy brushing against the kitchen floorboards. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. I live in a 2-story house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood just outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania. My parents are light sleepers, especially my mom, who jolts awake at the smallest creak in the hallway. I was 18 at the time, just a few months shy of leaving for college, and had always thought of myself as someone who could handle his nerves. But that night, something felt off from the very beginning. I stepped out of bed, barefoot on the cold wood floor. The air had a strange stillness to it, like the house was holding its breath. I made my way quietly across the hall to my parents' room. Their door was open. Empty. The bed was perfectly made. No indentations on the pillows. The comforter still pulled tight. "Dad?" I whispered, even though something inside told me not to speak. "Mom?" No answer. I blinked in confusion and walked further down the hall to check my sister's room. Her light was on, which wasn't unusual. She stayed up late talking to friends or watching anime on her tablet. But when I peeked in, the room was empty too. Her chair was pulled out, her blanket rumpled at the edge of her bed, like someone had just stepped away. My chest tightened. So who was downstairs? The rustling returned, clearer this time. A dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across linoleum. I crept down the stairs as quietly as I could, careful not to make the old middle step groan under my weight. From the staircase landing, I had a partial view into the kitchen, and I froze. 2 men. One was wearing a dark hoodie, the other a plain white tank top. Their backs were to me. They weren't talking, just moving, slowly and methodically. One of them held something under his arm that looked like my dad's tablet. The other had pulled open the fridge and was staring inside like he lived there. I turned around and bolted up the stairs, skipping the creaky step and diving back into my room. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and backed into the corner by the dresser. My ears were ringing. I could barely hear over the blood rushing in my head. Then came the sound I'll never forget, the doorknob rattling. Once. Twice. Then came the banging. I jumped awake. I was in bed. My sheets were drenched in sweat. My chest was heaving like I'd been running. I rolled over and stared at the clock. 2:15 a.m. I sat up slowly, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. Just a dream, I told myself. A bad dream. I'd had nightmares before, especially after stressful weeks, and finals were coming up. My head was messing with me. Still, I needed to prove to myself that everything was fine. That I was awake now. Really awake. I pulled on a hoodie and stepped into the hallway. The air felt less tense this time, but the silence was still heavy. I walked past my parents' room. It was dark, but I could hear my dad's faint snore. My sister's door was shut, light off. Everything was normal. I went downstairs. The house was dark but familiar. The living room was empty. I flicked the kitchen light on and there they were. The 2 men. Same clothes. Same positions. This time, they weren't just moving around. They were screaming. Screaming at my parents and my sister, who were huddled on the floor by the fridge. My dad was bleeding from the forehead. My mom was holding my sister, shaking. One of the men shoved her against the counter and yelled something I couldn't hear. I didn't move. I couldn't. It feels like my feet were cemented to the floor. One of them turned toward me, slow and deliberate, and raised a finger to his lips. Sure. I bolted up the stairs, locked myself in my room, and collapsed against the door. And then, I woke up again, soaked in sweat. My sheets tangled around me like vines. The room was completely dark. I reached over, hand trembling, and flipped my phone. 2:15 a.m. This time, I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that I was really, truly awake now. That I wasn't about to live the same moment again. I didn't sleep for the next 2 days. Couldn't. To this day, I still don't know if that final waking was real. Or if I'm still caught somewhere inside that dream. Sometimes, when I glance at the clock in the middle of the night, I hesitate before looking. Because if it says 2:15 a.m. again, I'm not sure I want to know what comes next. Story 7. The summer of 2018 was sticky and oppressive in our small Nebraska town, the kind of heat that made the air smell like hot asphalt and cut grass. I think I was 13 or 14 as at that time, sprawled on the living room couch, my bare feet dangling over the armrest, the TV droning some late-night game show. My parents let me stay up past midnight on Fridays, a treat I lived for, even if it meant fighting sleep to prove I could handle it. Our little ranch house on Maple Drive was quiet, save for the hum of the window AC unit and the occasional creak of the floorboards settling. The living room smelled faintly of my mom's lavender candles, their wicks long burned out, and the popcorn I'd spilled on the cushions. It was around 1:30 a.m. when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic scraping from the front yard, like metal dragging on concrete. My stomach twisted, the kind of uneasy feeling you get when you're not sure if you're awake or dreaming. I muted the TV, the silence amplifying every sound, the AC's low buzz, my own shallow breaths. The noise came again, deliberate, like someone was shifting something heavy. Our front yard had an old iron bench under the oak tree, a rusty thing my dad kept meaning to repaint. I crept to the big picture window, my socks sliding on the hardwood, and parted the heavy curtains just enough to peek out. There, on the bench, sat a woman, maybe in her 40s, her thin frame hunched in a tattered sundress, the kind you'd see at a thrift store, stained dark with what looked like mud, or worse. Her hands clutched a hammer, its head glinting under the streetlight, and her hair hung in greasy strands over her face. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I stumbled back, the curtain falling shut. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt like it was stuffed with cotton. The scraping stopped, and for a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it, my tired brain playing tricks. I ran to my parents' room, my bare feet slapping the cold floor. "Mom! Dad!" I burst in, my voice high and shaky. My mom sat up, her hair a mess, blinking in the dark. "Casey, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. My dad groaned, rolling over. "It's just a nightmare, kid. Go back to bed." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "There's a woman outside. On the bench. She's got a hammer, and she's covered in something." My dad sighed, his face hardening. "You're too old for this, Casey. It's nothing." But I kept babbling, my words tripping over each other, until he swung his legs out of bed, muttering, "Fine, let's go look." He grabbed my arm, not hard but firm, and marched me back to the living room. I dragged my feet, my stomach churning, begging him to stop. "Dad, please, she's out there." He ignored me, his slippers scuffing the floor. "You need to grow up," he said, yanking the front door open. "See? There's nothing." His words died. The woman was still there, her head snapping up to stare at us, her eyes wide and glassy, like a deer caught in headlights. The hammer dangled in her hand, and the stains on her dress gleamed wetly under the porch light. My dad froze, his grip on my arm tightening until it hurt. "Stay here," he whispered, shoving me behind him. He slammed the door shut, the lock clicking loudly, and yelled for my mom. "Lynn, call the cops! Now!" I heard her fumbling with her phone in the bedroom, her voice shaking as she spoke to the dispatcher. My dad ran to the closet, pulling out his hunting rifle, the one he used for deer season. The air smelled sharp now, like sweat and fear, and my legs wobbled as I sank to the floor, clutching the couch. Dad cracked the door open again, just enough to point the rifle barrel out. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice steady but loud, like he was trying to convince himself he wasn't scared. The woman's voice came back, low and hoarse, like she'd been screaming for hours. "They took my daughter. I didn't do it. I just want her back." Her words sent a chill down my spine, not because of what she said, but how she said it, flat, like she was reading a script. My dad shouted, "The police are coming. Stay where you are." She stood slowly, the hammer swinging at her side, and started walking toward the street, her bare feet slapping the pavement. My mom appeared, her face pale, clutching her phone. "They're on their way," she whispered. Dad kept the rifle trained on the woman until she disappeared into the shadows of the neighbor's yard. He slammed the door again, locking it twice, and turned to me, his face gray. "You okay, kid?" I nodded, but I wasn't. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and the image of her eyes burned into my brain. The police showed up 10 minutes later, their flashlights sweeping the yard. They found her 2 blocks away, trying to pry open a garage door with the hammer. She kept muttering about her daughter, but the cops said there was no record of a missing kid. They took her away, and my dad sat on the couch, the rifle across his lap, staring at the door like he expected her to come back. Story 8. My name's Eric, and this happened to my dad back in the fall of 1993, before I was born. He never liked talking about it, but one night, after a few drinks and a dead quiet backyard, he finally told me the whole story. I recorded it in my head like it was gospel, mostly because of the way he looked while telling it. There was no smirk, no punchline. Just this stillness in his face, like he never really put it behind him. He and two of his college buddies, Dave and Ramon, took a trip that October out west. They'd been saving up through part-time jobs and classes, and this was their big post-midterm blowout. A dusty little road trip through the Four Corners, Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado. They had an old bay Volvo wagon, a film camera, and no real plan. One of the places they stopped was this overlook on the northern edge of a lesser-known part of the canyon. Not the popular tourist side with fences and gift shops. This was more remote. Barely marked. A patchy gravel pull-off with some waist-high shrubs and low brush crawling out toward the edge. It was quiet, isolated. My dad said he doesn't remember seeing a single other car the entire time they were out there. They'd been goofing around all afternoon, doing what dumb college guys do. Skipping rocks, talking about who they'd rather fight, one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses. That kind of thing. Dave, who had a busted sense of humor, came up with this idea to take a fishing photo off the edge of the canyon. Said it'd be funny to make it look like Dad was trying to catch something in the river hundreds of feet below. So they rigged it up. Dad stood near the edge, holding one of Ramon's old hiking poles like a rod, pretending to cast. He was smiling mid-laugh. You can even picture it. The wind cutting across the canyon, the smell of dry earth and sun-warmed rock, the sky sharp and cloudless. They took the shot, laughed about it, and moved on. Drove a few more hours before crashing at some rundown motel with a broken Coke machine and weird stains on the carpet. A week later, after they got home to Denver, Dave went to pick up the prints. This was the early 90s. Digital was still years off, and you didn't know what you had until it came back in an envelope with your thumbprints all over the glossy paper. They were flipping through the stack, sunsets, group shots, a squirrel with a Cheeto. Then came the fishing photo. My dad says he felt the blood drain from his face the second he saw it. There, maybe 6 or 7 feet behind him, half hidden in the sagebrush, was a man. At least, it looked like a man. Tall. Thin. Wearing a black coat, maybe wool or denim, it was hard to tell. His skin was pale, almost grayish. No hair that they could see. And his mouth, this was the part that stuck with all of them. His mouth was curled into this slight, off-kilter smirk. Like he knew something they didn't. Like he'd been waiting for them to notice. But that wasn't what made the picture so disturbing. It was the man's eyes. You couldn't see them clearly. There was just enough shadow. But they weren't looking at my dad. They were looking straight into the camera. Right at Dave. They tore apart the memory, trying to make sense of it. Ramon swore they'd been alone. Said he'd even looked around when they got out of the car, just to see if it was safe to go near the edge. Not a soul in sight. They were there for maybe 15, 20 minutes max. There wasn't enough room for someone to sneak up and stay hidden in that low scrub, at least not without being heard. My dad said he would have heard twigs snapping. Felt something. Anything. But there was nothing. They even checked the negatives. The man was there. Same posture, same eerie little grin. My dad said he couldn't sleep for a week. He started having these dreams where he was back at the canyon, but it was dead quiet and completely empty, even the wind. He'd turn around, and the man would be there, closer each time, but never moving. Just staring with that same half-smile. Eventually, they stopped talking about it. Ramon tossed the print into a shoebox in his closet and swore he didn't want to see it again. Dave tried rationalizing it. Maybe it was a hiker, maybe they missed him, maybe it was just a trick of the light. But my dad never bought that. He said it felt wrong, like that man had been there for them. Story 9. I don't usually talk about this. It's one of those stories that sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, like something you'd read online and immediately scroll past. But I lived it. Or more accurately, I watched my older brother unravel while it happened. This started around 2016, when we were both still living at home in the suburbs of Dayton, Ohio. I was in my last year of high school, and Marcus, my brother, had just turned 24. He was working maintenance for a warehouse near the state line, driving a battered red Civic that sounded like it coughed whenever he hit the brakes. It began with a phone call. One night, I was up late playing video games, and I heard his phone buzzing in the next room. I figured it was just one of his friends or maybe his girlfriend, Jenna. It was around 2:30 in the morning, so I didn't think much of it. But the next night, the same thing happened. Buzzing. Again, around 2:30. And then again the next night. After about a week of this, I finally asked him, "You've got a stalker or something?" I joked. He didn't laugh. He just looked at me with this blank expression. "It's weird, man. It's not a number I recognize. And when I answer, there's no one talking. Just noise." I raised an eyebrow. "Like what kind of noise?" He hesitated. "It's hard to describe. Static, I guess. But worse. Like someone screaming through a broken radio." At first I thought he was screwing with me, but Marcus wasn't the kind of guy to make up stories. He was quiet, logical, sometimes to a fault. The kind of guy who would Google his symptoms before even thinking of going to a doctor. A few nights later, I was up late again when I heard his ringtone from down the hall. It was 2:38 a.m. this time. Then I heard him answer it, and what followed still gives me chills. There was a pause. Then his voice. "Hello?" A few seconds of silence. Then came a sound. It was faint, but I heard it clearly. Like a shrieking static, crackling, almost like someone was trapped inside the phone, screaming under layers of distortion. It rose and fell, like waves crashing in reverse. And then silence again. He hung up and didn't say a word. I didn't press him. This went on for a month. Same time every night. Same unknown number. Same hellish sound. He blocked the number, but it didn't help. The calls just came from a different one. Always random digits, different area codes, sometimes local, sometimes not. He tried back dialing once. He told me the call rang and rang before an old man finally picked up. The guy sounded confused, said his phone hadn't rung all night. Said he lived alone and barely used his cell. Marcus changed his number. Got a new SIM. Even contacted his provider. After that, things were quiet for about a week. And then it started again. He was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard his phone vibrate on the counter. He looked at the screen, went pale, and let it ring out. No voicemail, as always. That week, I started noticing changes in him. He'd be up most of the night, staring at the walls or pacing the kitchen floor. His appetite dropped. He quit going out with friends, even stopped answering Jenna's texts. One night I found him sleeping in the living room with the lights on, clutching his phone like he expected it to explode. He back-dialed again, desperate. This time, a woman answered. She had no idea who he was, said she hadn't made any outgoing calls that day. The fear in Marcus's eyes was something I hadn't seen before. It was deeper than just paranoia. It was like he was starting to believe the calls weren't coming from people anymore. Eventually, he snapped. Ended his contract. New carrier. Brand new phone. He even switched operating systems, like that would matter. For a few blissful nights, nothing happened. I remember the first night he slept through without waking up. He looked like someone who'd escaped a war zone. But it didn't last. About 5 days in, the new phone buzzed. 2:41 a.m. unknown number. He didn't answer. It rang again. And again. 4 times in total. Always with that same eerie patience, like whoever, or whatever, was calling knew he was listening. By this point, Marcus was falling apart. He quit his job, stopped shaving, barely spoke. Jenna broke up with him after she came over and found him sitting on the kitchen floor, whispering to himself with the phone lying next to him, like he was waiting for it to ring again. Then, one day, it stopped. No warning. No goodbye. The calls just ceased. His phone sat untouched for days, and the silence almost made it worse, like waiting for a jump scare that never came. A few weeks later, his phone was disconnected. He couldn't afford the bill. Life just kind of settled back to normal. The air in the house felt lighter. Marcus started eating again. I even saw him smile once. Then something happened that I still can't explain. It was a Thursday night. I was watching TV with my mom when she picked up the house phone. We still had a landline back then. She frowned and held it out to me. "Eric," she said, "can you listen to this?" I put the phone to my ear and froze. That sound. That awful, crackling static. Like metal grinding in the distance, overlaid with distant, howling voices. Too distorted to make out, but not entirely human. I yanked the phone away and looked at the caller ID. Just a string of zeros. We showed it to Marcus. His face went pale. He didn't speak, just sat down on the couch and buried his face in his hands. He tried to redial the number, hands shaking. A robotic voice came on immediately. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected." That was the last time we ever heard it. A few months later, Jenna, his ex, confessed something. Said she'd been the one who gave out his number online. Some kind of twisted payback for cheating on her. She'd posted it in forums, chat rooms, even signed him up for some haunted phone call sites she found. At first, it was supposed to be harmless. Just annoying prank calls. But she swore, she stopped after a week when it got too weird. She said, "Whatever was happening after that, it wasn't me. We don't talk about it anymore." Marcus moved out, changed everything about his life. I still think about those calls, though. About how something so small, just a phone ringing at night, can chip away at your sanity until you're too scared to sleep. And sometimes, when I'm up late, and I hear my phone vibrate on the nightstand, I don't answer. Story 10. It was the autumn of 2021, and the air in my small apartment in Lisbon, Portugal, carried the faint scent of salt from the nearby Tagus River, mixed with the musty smell of old plaster walls. I was 26, working as a freelance language tutor, teaching English to locals in Alfama, a maze of cobblestone streets and pastel buildings. My one-room apartment was cozy but cramped, with creaky wooden floors and a single window overlooking a quiet alley. I loved the late evenings after lessons, sipping tea and sketching in my journal, the hum of the city fading into silence. But that October night, everything changed. I'd been tutoring Anna, a shy 17-year-old preparing for university exams. It was a Friday, and we'd run late, poring over grammar exercises until nearly midnight. The trams had stopped running, and Anna lived across town, too far to walk. She fidgeted, her dark hair falling over her eyes, and asked, "Can I stay here tonight?" "I'll take the first tram tomorrow." My stomach nodded. Having a student sleepover felt wrong, unprofessional, risky, but her pleading eyes and the late hour wore me down. "Fine," I said, forcing a smile. "You can crash on the couch." I gave her a spare blanket, its wool scratchy and smelling faintly of lavender from my laundry soap, and settled into my narrow bed across the room. The apartment was quiet, save for the distant clatter of a neighbor's shutters, and we both drifted off. Around 3 a.m., a soft tapping woke me. My eyes snapped open, the room dark except for a sliver of streetlight cutting through the curtains. Anna was sitting up on the couch, her silhouette tense. "Sophia," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I'm really thirsty. Can we go get some water?" I groaned, rubbing my eyes, the air cool against my skin. "There's a jug in the fridge," I mumbled, Go grab it. But she shook her head, her voice insistent. No, I mean, let's go to the cafe down the street. They're open late. Please. I stared at her, disbelief prickling my skin. It's 3 a.m., Anna. Drink what's here and go back to sleep. She wouldn't let up, her voice growing sharper, almost desperate. I can't stay here. I need to go now. Her eyes darted to the ceiling, where a small hatch led to the attic, a storage space I'd never bothered to check. My heart thudded, the room suddenly feeling smaller, the air heavier, like it was pressing against my chest. What's going on? I asked, sitting up, the bed springs creaking. Anna swallowed, her hands twisting the blanket. I heard something up there. She whispered. Like breathing. Slow, like someone's trying to be quiet. A chill ran down my spine, and I listened, straining my ears. The apartment was silent, but now every creak felt alive, every shadow too dark. I grabbed my phone, its screen glowing 3:04 a.m., and flicked on the bedside lamp. The light cast long shadows, making the hatch above seem like a black hole in the ceiling. It's probably just the building settling, I said, my voice thin, trying to convince myself. But Anna's face was pale, her eyes wide. It wasn't the building. It was steady, like someone exhaling. My mouth went dry, and I stood, my bare feet cold on the wood floor, the faint smell of dust tickling my nose. I grabbed a broom from the corner, its handle worn and splintery, and nudged the hatch open. The hinges groaned, revealing a dark, musty void. I shone my phone's flashlight up, the beam trembling, catching cobwebs and stacks of old boxes. Nothing. Just silence and dust. But the air felt wrong, thick, like it was holding a secret. See? Nothing, I said, my voice louder than I meant, trying to shake the unease. Anna shook her head, grabbing her jacket. I'm not staying. Come with me, please. Her urgency was infectious, and my skin prickled as I pulled on my shoes, the laces stiff and cold. We left the apartment, the hallway smelling of old paint and cigarette smoke from a neighbor's flat. Outside, the alley was quiet, the cobblestones slick with dew, the cafe's neon sign buzzing faintly down the street. As we stepped onto the sidewalk, Anna grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in. I didn't want to scare you in there, she whispered, but I saw something move up there, through the hatch. It wasn't boxes. My blood ran cold, and I glanced back at the apartment window, dark and uninviting. Why didn't you say that before? I hissed, my voice shaking. She looked down, her voice barely audible. I didn't want it to hear us. We didn't go to the cafe. I called my friend Joao, who lived nearby, his voice groggy but concerned when I explained. Stay put, I'm coming, he said. We waited in the alley, the air sharp with salt and the distant hum of a tram starting its early route. Joao arrived in his beat-up Fiat, his hair messy, and we drove to the police station, my hands still trembling. The officer, a tired man with a graying beard, took my statement, his pen scratching loudly as I described the breathing, the movement. Probably just a rat, he said, but he agreed to check the apartment. Back at the building, the police climbed into the attic, their flashlights sweeping the dark. They found a sleeping bag, crumpled food wrappers, and a torn notebook with my name written over and over in smudged ink. My stomach churned. Someone had been living up there, maybe for weeks, watching me through the hatch. The officer said it was likely a squatter, common in old buildings, but they found no one. Lock the hatch, he said, handing me a padlock. And don't sleep alone tonight. Story 11. The winter of 2022 was bitter in Edinburgh, Scotland, the kind of cold that seeped through the walls of my old tenement flat in Leith. I was 28, a barista scraping by, sharing the place with my girlfriend Clara, a nurse who worked out hours. Our flat was a third-floor walk-up, its windows rattling in the wind, the air inside smelling of damp wool and the faint vanilla of Clara's candles. The bedroom was small, with scuffed wooden floors and a creaky bed pushed against the wall papered in faded green. On February 12th, I'd come home late from a closing shift, my clothes reeking of coffee grounds, and collapsed beside Clara, her warmth a comfort against the chill. We fell asleep to the low howl of the wind outside, the radiator clanking like a distant heartbeat. Around 4 a.m., a sharp tug on the blanket jolted me awake. My eyes snapped open, the room dark except for a sliver of streetlight sneaking through the gap in the curtains. Clara was sitting up, her silhouette tense, her voice a harsh whisper. "Ewan, what's that noise?" My heart thudded, and I listened, the air thick with the smell of cold plaster and something else, musty, like wet leaves. There it was, a faint scratching, like nails dragging on wood, coming from the corner of the room near the wardrobe. "Probably just mice," I mumbled, my voice thick with sleep, but my skin prickled. Clara shook her head, her hand gripping mine, cold and clammy. "It's not mice. It's bigger." I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, its screen glowing 4:03 a.m., and flicked on the flashlight. The beam swept the room, catching the wardrobe's chipped paint and the pile of laundry I'd meant to wash. The scratching stopped, but the silence was worse, heavy, like someone holding their breath. "Ewan," Clara whispered, her eyes wide. "I saw something move over there." My stomach nodded, and I aimed the light at the corner. Nothing, just shadows and the wardrobe's open door, which I swore I'd close before bed. "You're half asleep," I said, trying to sound calm, but my voice shook. "Let's check." I slid out of bed, my bare feet hitting the icy floor, the boards creaking under my weight. Clara stayed close, her breath quick and shallow, as we approached the wardrobe. The scratching started again, slower, deliberate, like someone testing the wood. My heart raced, and I gripped the phone tighter, the light shaking in my hand. "Who's there?" I called, my voice louder than I meant, echoing in the small room. No answer, but the air felt wrong, thick with that musty smell, like something had been in there too long. I reached for the wardrobe door, my fingers brushing the cold handle, when Clara gasped. "Ewan, look!" She pointed to the floor, where the light caught a smudge of dirt, like a bare footprint, leading from the wardrobe to the bed. I yanked the door open, the hinges squeaking, revealing only clothes and boxes. But the footprint burned into my brain, and Clara's face was pale, her eyes darting to the corner. "I swear I saw a shape," she said, her voice barely a whisper, like someone standing there, watching us. My mouth went dry, and I slammed the wardrobe shut, the sound too loud in the quiet. "Let's go to the kitchen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need light." We stumbled out of the bedroom, the hallway dark, the air smelling of old paint and dust. I flicked on the kitchen light, its harsh glow making us both squint, and we sat at the table, clutching mugs of tea we didn't drink, the steam curling in the cold air. I called my mate Neil, who lived a few streets over, his voice groggy when he answered at 4:30 a.m. "Mate, something's weird here," I said, keeping my voice low, like the walls could hear. "Can you come by?" Neil, always up for a laugh, sounded serious for once. "Lock the door, Ewan. I'm on my way." We waited, the scratching gone but the flat feeling alive, every creak of the pipes or gust of wind making us jump. Clara kept glancing at the bedroom door, her hands twisting the mug's handle. "I felt it watching us," she whispered, "like it knew we were awake." Neil arrived, his boots loud on the stairs, and we checked the flat together, his flashlight sweeping every corner. The footprint was still there, smudged but clear, and in the wardrobe, we found a torn scrap of cloth stiff with dirt, tucked behind a box. My stomach churned. "Could be a squatter," Neil said, but his voice wavered. "Old flats like this, people sneak in." We called the police, who showed up an hour later, 2 officers with tired eyes. They searched the flat, finding nothing but the cloth and a faint scratch mark on the wardrobe's back panel, like someone had clawed at it. Probably just a vagrant. One said, handing me a card. Get a lock for that wardrobe. We didn't sleep that night, sitting in the kitchen until dawn, the flat's usual coziness gone, replaced by a chill that wasn't just the weather. Clara moved out a week later, unable to stay in the bedroom, and I followed soon after, crashing with Neil. The day we left, I found a folded note under the bed, the paper yellowed and smelling of damp earth. In shaky ink it read, "You felt me, Ewan. I felt you too." The wind howled outside, and from the empty flat I swore I heard a faint scratch, like nails on wood, following me down the stairs.